My father-in-law locked my 6-year-old daughter out on the deck during an ice storm because her cousin told him she'd broken a vase. And 3 hours later, I was standing in the ICU at Foothills Hospital in Calgary watching a ventilator breathe for her. I can still hear the part the constable read back to me from his statement. He said he told her to stay outside and think about what she'd done, because he wasn't going to reward a liar with a warm house. By the time my sister-in-law remembered her and went to check, the deck light had been off for 3 hours and the wind chill was below -30. I want to tell you something before I get into how a man who built half the strip malls in southern Alberta ended up sitting in a courtroom with his hands cuffed in his lap, shaking so hard the chains rattled. Tell me where you're watching from, eh? Drop it in the comments. And if you've ever had to choose your child over your own family, hit subscribe, because what I did to him afterward is the only thing in my life I have never once regretted. My name is Claire. I'm 29, and until 18 months ago I was a logistics officer with the Canadian Armed Forces, posted out of CFB Sfifield, doing supply chain security work that I was not allowed to talk about at Christmas dinner. My daughter Ren is 6. She has a mild peanut allergy and an asthma puffer she's supposed to carry everywhere, and she is the gentlest kid you will ever meet, the kind who apologizes to furniture when she bumps into it. My husband Desmond died 2 years ago, an aneurysm, no warning, gone between one phone call and the next. After that, his family, the Faulkners, became the only extended family Ren had, because my own parents are back in Nova Scotia and not exactly the flying out every month type. Desmond's father, Reginald Faulkner, is a property developer worth, by my last estimate, somewhere north of $40 million. He has a house in Mount Royal with a wine cellar bigger than my apartment, and a reputation in Calgary business circles for being a tough but fair self-made man. People wrote that in articles about him, tough but fair. He was never tough but fair to me. From the day Desmond brought me home, I was the girl from away, the one with no money and a job nobody at his country club understood. After Desmond died, Reginald's tone toward me changed from cold to something closer to ownership. He started talking about Ren like she belonged to the Faulkner name more than she belonged to me. He paid for her ballet lessons without asking. He enrolled her in a private school waitlist without telling me. He called it looking after his own. 18 months ago, I left the military and started a private risk consulting firm, doing due diligence and security audits for energy companies, the kind of work that meant I sometimes had to fly out for 2 or 3 days with my phone genuinely off. The Faulkners thought I was still in uniform somewhere overseas. I let them think it. It was easier than explaining myself to people who'd already decided who I was. That weekend I had a contract in Fort McMurray that turned into an emergency, a security breach at a client site that needed me there in person with no notice. I called Reginald myself because his daughter Priscilla, Desmond's older sister, had been asking for weeks to have Ren over for what she called a proper family weekend. Priscilla's husband, Grant, is a personal injury lawyer with a smile I never trusted, and their son Cody is 11 and has never once, in 3 years, been told no. I dropped Ren off on the Friday with her puffer, her EpiPen, a note taped inside her backpack listing both, and a hug that lasted longer than usual because some part of me already didn't want to leave her there. Reginald stood on the porch in his cashmere coat and told me, and I remember this exactly, "We'll take excellent care of what's ours, not her. What's ours?" I was wheels up 4 hours later with my phone in airplane mode, dealing with a server room intrusion at an oil sands facility that genuinely could not wait. I want to be honest with you, even if my phone had been on, the calls wouldn't have reached me. I was underground in a facility with no signal for most of Saturday. That detail matters, because there are people in my life who tried to suggest later that I'd abandoned her. I didn't. I left my daughter with her grandfather. That is not supposed to be a risk. What happened, as I pieced it together afterward from the police report, from Priscilla's eventual statement, and from Ren herself once she was well enough to talk about it. Saturday evening, Cody told his grandfather that Ren had knocked over and broken a Murano glass vases in the front sitting room, one Reginald had bought on a trip to Italy with his late wife. It was, by every account I've since gathered, already cracked. Cody had been throwing a football in the house against his mother's rules, and the vase had been damaged days before. He blamed Ren because Ren was 6 and would not think to defend herself with a story. Reginald didn't ask questions. He has never, in the years I knew him, asked a question when he could deliver a verdict instead. He marched Ren to the back deck in her socks, opened the sliding door into a wind that the weather service had already flagged with an extreme cold warning, and told her she could come back in when she learned not to lie in his house. Then he closed the door. Priscilla and Grant were out at a dinner. The housekeeper had gone home for the evening. Cody, by his own later admission, watched television. 3 hours. In -30 wind chill, in socks, in a cotton sweater, with asthma and no puffer. Because her puffer was in the overnight bag Reginald had told the housekeeper to bring inside and never thought to check. Priscilla found her when she got home around 9, blue-lipped, barely conscious, curled against the patio door trying to get whatever warmth bled through the glass. She called the ambulance herself. To her credit, that much she did right. I landed back in Calgary near midnight to 9 missed calls and a voicemail from a hospital social worker asking me to come to Foothills immediately. I don't remember the drive. I remember the smell of the ICU, the particular cold antiseptic smell that I will never be able to separate from the sound of Ren's ventilator. I remember a doctor with tired eyes telling me she had severe hypothermia and that the cold had triggered a near-fatal asthma attack on top of it, and that the next 12 hours would tell us things he didn't want to promise me yet. They train you in the forces to put grief in a box and deal with the threat first. I stood outside that glass wall watching machines breathe for my daughter, and I felt something in me go very quiet and very precise. I was not going to cry in that hallway. I was going to find out exactly what happened, exactly who had made which decision, and exactly what each of those decisions was going to cost them. A constable came to take a statement around 2 in the morning. Reginald had told them on the record that he'd sent her outside to think about what she'd done and that he hadn't realized how cold it had gotten because he'd been in his study with the door closed. He used the word thief, a 6-year-old over a vase that wasn't even broken by her. He said it like it explained itself, like the rest of us were supposed to nod along with the logic of a man who'd never once in his life had to sit outside in the cold and wonder if anyone was coming. I didn't say much to the constable that night beyond what I needed to. I have learned in my career that the people who talk the least in the first 48 hours are the ones who end up in control of the story. Ren spent 6 days in hospital. I did not leave except to shower and to make 3 phone calls I will tell you about. The first was to a colleague of mine, a forensic accountant named Priyanka who I'd worked with on 2 corporate fraud files and trusted with my life. The second was to a family lawyer in downtown Calgary who specializes in child protection cases, a woman with a voice like a closing door. The third was to myself in the hospital chapel at 4 in the morning, where I made a promise that I intend to keep for the rest of my life. Nobody who loved their reputation more than my daughter would ever be alone with her again. Here is something people don't understand about men like Reginald Faulkner. They build their whole identity on being unimpeachable, the self-made guy, the philanthropist, with his name on the children's wing at South Health Campus. Of all the bitter ironies, that reputation is not just vanity, it's collateral. It's what lets them get away with things, because nobody wants to believe the man who funded the new playground at the hospital is the same man who left a child outside to freeze. So while Ren slept under monitors, I started quietly pulling threads. Priyanka found the first one inside 4 days. Reginald's company, Faulkner Crestview Developments, had been running 2 sets of books on a strip mall project in Airdrie for the better part of 3 years, underreporting income to the CRA, in a way that was sloppy enough to be deliberate but careful enough that nobody had caught it. Grant, Priscilla's husband, had drafted several of the shell agreements himself, which told me he wasn't just a bystander married into money, he was load-bearing. I also learned, almost by accident, while going through Ren's overnight bag receipts, trying to document the puffer's whereabouts for the lawyer, that Reginald had been quietly named as a secondary beneficiary on a life insurance policies of Desmond's that I had never been told existed, set up years before Desmond and I even met, that Reginald had simply never bothered to update or mention. It wasn't illegal. It was just one more small example of a man who believed everything in our family eventually belonged to him by default. I didn't go to the press. I didn't post anything online, despite what some of you are probably hoping I'll say. I went to Child and Family Services first and gave a full statement with the hospital records attached, because I needed Ren legally protected before I did anything else. Then I sat down with my lawyer and we built a file. It took 5 weeks. Ren came home after 6 days but needed follow-up respiratory care and saw a child psychologist twice a week because she'd started having nightmares about doors locking, about cold, about being unable to make her voice loud enough for anyone to hear her. I will tell you plainly, that part still makes me angrier than anything else in this whole story. Not the vase, not the lie, not even the 3 hours in the cold, the nightmares. The Faulkners, for their part, behaved exactly as I expected. Reginald sent flowers to the hospital with a card that said, "Get well soon, Rennie," as though he'd tripped her at a birthday party. Priscilla called me crying, apologizing, then in the same breath asking if I was really going to make this a whole thing with the police because of what it might do to the family name before the holidays. Grant didn't call at all. Grant, I would later learn, was already on the phone with a colleague trying to figure out how exposed Faulkner Crestview was if I decided to involve the CRA. I let 5 weeks pass without saying a single threatening word to any of them. I went to one family dinner, the annual pre-Christmas one Reginald insists on hosting at the house in Mount Royal, the same one where, I found out later, he had once told Desmond that I wasn't quite suited to the family. I sat through that dinner with a flash drive in my coat pocket and let Reginald make a toast about how grateful he was that our girls came home safe, plural, as though Wren's hospitalization had been some minor scare instead of something he caused with his own hands. When the plates were cleared and his guests, business associates, and a city councilor he was clearly courting for a rezoning vote were still seated around that absurd table, I stood up. I am not by nature a dramatic person. The military trains the drama out of you. But I had learned, over 14 years of debriefs and interrogations, that the most effective thing you can do to a man who has built his life on control is to take it away from him in front of an audience he respects. I told the table, calmly, what happened to my daughter. I read word for word from the police statement Reginald gave that night, the part where he used the word thief about a 6-year-old. I watched the city councilor's face change. Then I sat down on the table in front of Reginald, a folder Priyanka and I had built over 5 weeks, the CRA discrepancies, the shell agreements with Grant's signature on 3 of them, and a letter from my lawyer confirming that Child and Family Services, the Calgary Police Service Domestic Conflict Unit, and the Canada Revenue Agency had each already received copies of everything in that folder, dated 2 days earlier. The room went so quiet I could hear the furnace kick on. Reginald's hands, the man who never once in my presence showed an unsteady moment, started shaking on the white tablecloth. He asked me, in a voice I had never heard him use, how I could have possibly gotten all of that. I told him the truth. I told him I'd spent 14 years learning exactly how people like him hide things, and that I had simply, finally, decided to use it on someone who deserved it. What followed over the next several months wasn't quick or cinematic, because that's not how the legal system actually works, here or anywhere, but it was thorough. The CRA opened a formal audit on Faulkner Crestview that, by the time it concluded, resulted in significant reassessed taxes, penalties, and a fraud referral that named both Reginald and Grant. The Calgary Police Service laid a charge against Reginald for criminal negligence causing bodily harm, given Wren's documented medical condition and the extreme cold warning that had been in effect. Grant lost his standing with the Law Society pending the outcome of the fraud investigation, which effectively ended his ability to practice while it dragged on. Priscilla, for what it's worth, was never charged with anything, but she lost her position on 2 charity boards. Once the story became public record through the court filings, and she has not spoken to me since, which I consider a fair trade. I also filed and won a full and permanent restraining order against Reginald and against Cody having any unsupervised contact with Wren ever again. The judge, reading the hospital records aloud in a flat, careful voice, did not take long to decide. The trial for the negligence charge happened a year later, almost to the week. I sat in the gallery in a gray suit, the same kind of plain, pressed gray suit I used to wear to briefings, because some habits you keep on purpose. I watched the man who once told my husband I wasn't suited to the family get led out of that Calgary courtroom in cuffs, his cashmere traded for a prison-issued jumpsuit, his lawyer's expensive cologne not quite masking how badly he'd sweated through the hearing. He looked back at the gallery once, at the empty seats where Priscilla and Grant should have been and weren't, because by then neither of them could afford to be photographed near him. Wren is 8 now. She still sees her psychologist once a month, mostly out of caution rather than need, because the nightmare stopped a long while ago. She plays ringette on Saturdays at the rink 2 blocks from our new place in Bridgeland, and last month, completely unprompted, she told her coach that her mom used to be a secret spy and now she catches bad guys with numbers, which is approximately 80% accurate and the only version of my resume I will ever fully sign off on. I never went looking for revenge for its own sake. I went looking for the truth, because that was the only language a man like Reginald Faulkner had never figured out how to buy. It turned out to be enough.